Daniel Harris stood at the outer gates of the colony, his rifle resting against his shoulder. The night sky stretched wide above him, painted with stars and the glow of two pale moons. The tall towers of the settlement rose behind him, their lights flickering in the cold air. He had worked long shifts before, but something about this night felt different. There was a silence that made him pay more attention than usual. He leaned on the gate, breathing slow, scanning the path that led into the colony. A figure moved along the road. At first he thought it was just another traveler, maybe a merchant or a visitor from a nearby settlement. But as the figure came closer, Daniel noticed details that made him straighten. It was a woman, tall and graceful, her dark gown sweeping against the ground. Her long black hair reflected the pale glow of the moons. She walked with calm steps, unhurried, as though she knew exactly where she was going. Daniel stepped forward, lifting his hand to signal for her to stop. She paused just outside the gate, her eyes meeting his. They were sharp and clear, carrying something he could not name. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his tone steady. "Evening, ma'am. Do you have a reason to enter the colony?" he asked. The woman tilted her head slightly, her lips curving almost into a smile. She did not answer right away. Daniel waited, feeling the silence stretch. Finally she spoke, her voice smooth but low. "I seek shelter for the night," she said simply. Daniel studied her. She did not look like the usual traders or settlers. Her gown was embroidered with fine designs, and around her neck shone a band of metal that seemed both jewelry and armor. She carried no visible weapon, yet something about her presence felt strong. He nodded slowly. "Well, you're welcome inside. Just follow the rules, that's all," he said. Then, in a moment of casual instinct, he raised his fist toward her, the way soldiers often did with each other. A gesture of trust, a gesture of camaraderie. The woman looked at his hand. For a heartbeat, she seemed surprised. Then, almost carefully, she raised her own hand and touched her fist to his. Daniel grinned at the small connection. To him, it was nothing more than a friendly greeting. To her, it was something deeper. Her name was Evelyn Drake, though Daniel did not know it. She had just come from the heart of the United Worlds, where she had been crowned queen. Her face was already known in the great halls of power, but here in the far colony no one recognized her. She had come without title, without crown, only with her silence and her hidden purpose. Daniel motioned for her to pass through the gate. She walked by him, and for a moment the air seemed heavier, as if her presence carried weight beyond the ordinary. Daniel felt it but could not explain it. He watched her until she disappeared into the narrow streets of the settlement. Hours later, Daniel still thought about her. He leaned against the wall, looking at the moons. Something about her eyes stayed in his mind. They were not cruel nor soft, but filled with fire and history. He had shaken hands with commanders and officers, but he had never seen eyes like hers. He did not know who she truly was, nor what future she carried with her. Inside the colony, Evelyn walked slowly among the quiet streets. People barely noticed her as they hurried with their tasks. Ouch. She listened to the sound of voices, the laughter of children, the noise of merchants packing their stalls. She was among them, as if she were one of them, yet deep within her, she knew the truth. She was their queen, though they did not bow. She was their shield, though they did not know her name. For the first time since her coronation, Evelyn felt a sense of calm. The soldier at the gate had treated her as no more than a traveler, no less than a human. He had greeted her with a simple gesture that meant more than words. She touched her hand where their fists had met and felt a strange warmth. Daniel Harris returned to his duty, unaware of the role he had just played. The night moved on, quiet and cold, while somewhere in the colony, a queen walked unseen among her people. The morning in the colony began with the sound of footsteps on stone streets and the distant ringing of bells. Farmers carried baskets of food, merchants set up their stalls, and children ran between the alleys with laughter on their lips. Life moved forward as always, but among the people walked Evelyn Drake, unseen for who she truly was. She moved with calm steps, her dark gown brushing against the ground as she watched and listened. Every detail mattered to her, every voice and every face. Daniel Harris stood nearby, posted as her escort. He had been ordered to follow her since she entered the colony, though no one had given him a reason. To him, She was simply a traveler with an air of mystery. He kept his rifle slung over his shoulder, walking 2 steps behind her. He did not speak much, but he noticed everything. Her presence made him alert in a way he did not fully understand. At the marketplace, Evelyn paused.
Yes.
Merchants shouted prices, people bargained, and the smell of bread and cooked meat filled the air. She turned her gaze to a group of workers repairing a cart. Their hands were rough, their faces tired, but their laughter was steady. She stood still for a moment, her eyes softening as she watched them. Daniel saw her expression and wondered what she was thinking. She looked at ordinary people as though their lives carried a weight he respected.
Oh.
When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Do they live like this every day? Daniel blinked at the question. Yes, ma'am. It's nothing special. Just life out here. Evelyn's eyes stayed on the workers. It is special, she said, almost to herself. They continued walking. Some of the townsfolk glanced at her as she passed, noticing her gown and the way she carried herself, but none recognized her. To them, she was just a stranger from another place. She liked it that way. For once, she could move without bowing crowds or the heavy sound of titles. Here she could simply be. Later, they came to the training yard, where young recruits practiced with wooden weapons. Shouts filled the air as they sparred under the watch of older soldiers. Evelyn stopped again, her eyes following their movements. She had led armies in her past, though Daniel did not know. She had seen the rise and fall of battles, had given orders that shaped history. Yet here she stood, silent, as if she were only an observer. Daniel watched her closely, noticed the way her hands tightened slightly when the recruits clashed, the way her breathing slowed when one fell to the ground. She carried herself like someone who had seen far more than she admitted. He wanted to ask her questions, but something in her eyes kept him silent. As the day moved toward evening, Evelyn and Daniel walked to the edge of the colony walls. Beyond lay hills and valleys that stretched far into the distance. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land. Evelyn stood still, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Daniel cleared his throat. You seem like you've been here before, he said. Evelyn turned her head slightly toward him. Not here. But I know places like this. I know the people. I know their hopes. I know what they fear losing. Daniel frowned. Her words carried a weight that seemed out of place for a traveler. He wondered again who she truly was, but he kept his questions to himself. He had learned that sometimes silence gave more answers than speech. That night, Evelyn returned to the quarters given to her. The room was simple, with a wooden bed and a small table. She sat by the window, looking at the stars. Her hand touched the band of metal at her neck, the only sign of her title. She thought of the soldier at the gate who had greeted her with nothing but a fist bump. In that moment, she had felt seen as more than a queen. She had felt human again. Across the colony, Daniel finished his shift and sat by the fire with other soldiers. His thoughts drifted back to the mysterious woman. Something about her stayed with him. He had no idea that she was not just a visitor. She was the new queen of the United Worlds, and her path would soon change his life forever. The days in the colony passed quietly, but beneath the surface, tension began to grow. Travelers brought news from nearby settlements. Whispers of unrest carried through the markets and into the barracks. A group of men who rejected the new rule of the United Worlds were gathering strength. They wanted to break free and take control for themselves. No one in the colony knew how soon the storm would reach them. Evelyn Drake walked through the streets each day, her eyes taking in every corner of the settlement. She listened to the voices of workers, soldiers, and merchants. She saw how they lived with hope and with fear, never knowing if tomorrow would bring peace or war. Daniel Harris remained by her side as her escort, though he still believed she was only a visitor. He noticed the way she studied the people, as if she carried their struggles in her heart. One afternoon they passed by a small square where soldiers trained. Evelyn stopped to watch again. The young recruits struck at practice targets with rifles and blades. Their commanders barked orders, pushing them harder with each move. Daniel glanced at her and saw the way her eyes followed every motion, her face calm but thoughtful. You watch them like you know what they're going through, Daniel said. Evelyn turned to him, her voice quiet. I know what it is to be young and to fight for a cause greater than yourself. I know the weight they will carry when the time comes. Daniel frowned, curious. "You sound like someone who has seen a lot of battles." She gave him a look that silenced further questions. He let the matter drop, though his curiosity grew stronger. That evening, a messenger arrived at the colony. He was breathless, his clothes torn from travel. He brought word that rebel forces had attacked a nearby village. Houses had burned, and families had fled. Fear spread quickly through the streets as the news reached the people. The soldiers prepared the walls, sharpening their defenses, but uncertainty filled the air. Evelyn stood in the command hall as the officers argued over plans. She remained silent, standing at the edge of the room, listening. Daniel was near her, watching her as much as the men speaking. She did not wear a uniform, yet she held herself with more strength than any officer in the room. When one commander shouted that the colony should shut its gates and hide, Evelyn finally spoke. "If you hide, they will not stop. They will see weakness and return stronger. You must stand together, or you will fall apart." The officers turned to look at her. Some scoffed, others frowned. To them, she was only a traveler, yet there was something in her tone that made even the loudest voices quiet. Daniel looked at her with wide eyes. He had never heard anyone speak with such certainty. After the meeting, Daniel walked with her through the silent corridors. "You talk like a leader," he said. "Not just someone passing through." Evelyn paused, her eyes meeting his.
Us.
For a moment, he thought she might tell him the truth.
Us.
Instead, she said, "Sometimes it takes only one voice to remind others of their duty." Outside, the sky darkened, and the first stars appeared. Daniel felt a heaviness settle in his chest. The rebels were moving closer. He wondered if the colony would be ready when the attack came. He also wondered about the woman beside him, who carried herself as if she had faced storms far greater than this one. The following day, the colony prepared for the worst. Barricades were raised, weapons checked, and families moved into the central hall for safety. Evelyn walked among the people, speaking little, but her presence calmed them. She listened to their fears, looked into their eyes, and left them with a strange sense of strength. Daniel noticed it too. Wherever she went, men stood taller, and women spoke with more hope. That night, Daniel sat outside the gates, staring at the hills in the distance. He thought about the rebels, about the battles he had trained for, and about the woman who now occupied his every thought. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. He did not know that the storm she foresaw was closer than he imagined, and that soon both of them would be tested in ways neither expected. The attack came without warning. Just before dawn, the colony was shaken awake by the sound of horns and the clash of weapons at the outer walls. Rebel forces had moved under the cover of darkness, and now they struck with full force. Fires broke out along the barricades, and shouts filled the streets. Families hurried into hiding, and soldiers rushed to their posts with weapons ready. Daniel Harris ran to the gates, rifle in hand, his heart pounding. The air smelled of smoke and steel. He joined the line of defenders, shouting orders to the younger recruits. For a moment, he wondered if this would be the day they all fell. Then he saw her. Evelyn Drake stood among the soldiers, her gown flowing in the wind, her eyes fierce. She looked like she belonged there, not as a visitor, but as someone who had faced war before. "Stay with the line," Daniel shouted as he pushed forward. He expected Evelyn to retreat, but instead she moved closer to the front. When a soldier hesitated, she placed a firm hand on his shoulder and said, "Stand tall. Shh. Do not give them ground." Her voice carried such certainty that the soldier obeyed without question. The rebels crashed against the gates, shouting with rage. Their weapons struck the wood and iron, splintering pieces with every blow. Arrows cut through the air, some striking the walls, others finding their marks. Daniel fired back, his shots steady and sharp. Around him, soldiers fought with desperation, their fear melting into determination as Evelyn moved among them. She gave no orders of rank, yet every man and woman who heard her words felt strength rise within them. At one point, the rebels forced open a section of the wall, pouring into the colony. Panic spread as defenders fell back. Daniel rushed forward, rallying his men, but it was Evelyn who turned the tide. She stepped into the breach with nothing but a fallen spear, her stance unyielding. The rebels hesitated, shocked by her fearlessness. Her voice rang out above the chaos. This is your home. Do not let them take it." Her words lit a fire in the hearts of the defenders. Soldiers surged forward, closing ranks, pushing back the invaders. Daniel fought beside her, firing and striking, his body moving on instinct. He stole glances at her and felt a strange awe. She was no ordinary traveler. She was someone who had lived through battle, someone who carried command in her very presence. The fight raged for hours. Smoke filled the air, the ground slick with blood and ash. Yet through it all, Evelyn never faltered. She moved like a commander, guiding men to where they were needed most, lifting their courage when it began to falter. Daniel found himself following her lead without realizing it. When she pointed, he moved. When she spoke, he listened. He felt as if he had known her for years, though he still did not know her truth. By midday, the rebels began to break. Their attacks grew weaker, their shouts less certain. One by one, they fell back, retreating into the hills beyond the colony. The gates stood battered but unbroken. The defenders raised their weapons in weary triumph. The colony had survived. Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest heaving from exhaustion. Round him, soldiers cheered and families wept with relief. He turned to look for Evelyn. She stood near the gate, her hair loose, her gown torn at the edges, her face marked with dust, yet her eyes still burned with strength. For a long moment, their gazes met. Daniel felt a mix of gratitude and confusion. Who was this woman, and why did she fight as though the fate of the world rested on her shoulders? As the colony tended to the wounded and put out the fires, whispers spread among the people. They had seen the stranger who had fought beside them. They had heard her voice in the middle of battle. Some began to wonder if she was more than she appeared. Daniel heard their words but kept his thoughts to himself. Deep down, he knew the truth was close. He had seen enough to understand that Evelyn Drake carried a secret far greater than she let on. And soon, that secret would no longer stay hidden. The colony stood quiet after the battle. Smoke rose slowly into the sky, carrying with it the smell of burnt wood and iron. The people moved carefully through the streets, helping the wounded and gathering what remained of their supplies. Children clung to their parents, and soldiers leaned on one another, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. But for all the scars left behind, the colony still stood. The walls had held, and the people had survived. Daniel Harris walked through the ruins of the outer gate, his rifle hanging at his side. His muscles ached from the long hours of fighting, but his mind was focused on only one thing. He searched for Evelyn Drake. He had seen her fight like no one else, standing firm when others faltered, giving hope when all seemed lost. She was no traveler, no simple guest. He knew that now. He just did not know how much larger her truth really was. He found her near the central square. She stood on the steps of the hall, speaking quietly to a group of wounded soldiers. Her gown was torn, her hair tangled by smoke and wind, but her eyes still burned with strength. Daniel paused, watching her, could see how the soldiers looked at her not as a stranger but as a leader. Even without titles, she carried an air of command. The people gathered in the square as the day moved toward evening. Word had spread quickly of what Evelyn had done in the battle. Families who had hidden in fear now wanted to see the woman who had stood at the front lines. Soldiers who had nearly lost hope now wanted to hear her voice again. The square filled until there was no space left. All eyes turned toward her. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd. His heart pounded as he waited. He knew this was the moment when she could no longer remain a mystery. Evelyn looked over the crowd. She could see their faces, marked by fear and by courage. These were the people she had sworn to protect. She had hidden her truth to walk among them, but now the time had come to reveal who she was. She raised her voice, steady and clear. "You have fought with bravery," she said. "You have defended your home with strength that no enemy could break. Today, you stood together, and because of that, you survived."
How the crowd listened in silence.
Some nodded, others held their children closer. Daniel felt his breath catch as she continued. "I did not come here as a traveler. I came here as your queen. My name is Evelyn Drake. By the will of the United Worlds, I was chosen to lead, not by blood, but by trust. And though you did not know my name when the battle came, you still fought by my side. That is why I will never forget you. You are not only my people, you are my strength." Gasps filled the square. Some people bowed, Others simply stared. The soldiers stood straighter, their eyes wide with shock. Daniel felt his chest tighten, remembered the night at the gate, the simple moment when he had raised his fist to her. He had greeted her as if she were anyone else, never knowing that she carried the crown of the worlds. When the noise of the crowd quieted, Evelyn's eyes found Daniel in the crowd. For a moment, the queen looked past the titles, past the duty, and saw only the soldier who had greeted her like a friend. Slowly, she raised her hand. Daniel hesitated, then smiled faintly and lifted his fist once more. The crowd fell silent as they watched. Evelyn stepped down from the steps, walked toward him, and touched her fist gently to his. It was not a gesture of royalty, but of trust. The people erupted in cheers. They saw not only a queen, but a leader who stood shoulder to shoulder with them. They saw that she valued the strength of even the simplest soldier. Daniel lowered his hand, shaking his head in disbelief, but smiling all the same. He knew now that his life had changed forever. As night fell, fires were lit to chase away the darkness. Songs rose from the square, voices lifted in celebration of survival and hope. Evelyn stood among them, no longer hidden, but shining as both queen and human. And beside her stood Daniel Harris, the soldier whose fist bump had begun a bond that would be remembered for generations.